Listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you isn't mythology, conspiracy, or fantasy. It's a pattern that repeats across civilizations that were oceans apart, thousands of years apart, and supposedly unaware of each other. From the temples of Luxor to the forgotten cities of the Andes, from the silent statues of Easter Island to the serpent-lined shrines of ancient India, there is a strange consistency hidden in the architecture, a pattern no textbook mentions openly, a pattern no archaeologist dares to conclude publicly. Many ancient sculptures, especially those carved with intense expressions and unblinking eyes, were not aligned to the sun, moon, or stars as we often assume. Instead, they were deliberately oriented towards something else, something invisible, something that modern science is only beginning to hint at. They were aligned to energy corridors, unseen pathways believed to pulse beneath the surface of the earth, like veins beneath skin. Imagine this, a statue with eyes fixed toward empty space, not toward a throne, not toward a gate, not toward the rising sun, but toward a direction that feels almost random. Yet, when archaeologists measure, scan, and map it, those statues align with electromagnetic anomalies, geological fault lines, telluric currents, and what some researchers now call Earth's energy grid. If this was a single case, it could be coincidence. But when the same orientation appears in dozens, then hundreds of ancient structures across continents and cultures, the probability of chance collapses. Civilizations that supposedly had no connection, Maya, Egyptian, Sumerian, Olmec, Khmer, Inca, Aboriginal Australian, all built statues facing very precise directions. And that raises a question no historian wants to touch. What were they looking at? Because sometimes their gaze does not face a landmark. It faces nothing. Empty space, a plain, a cliff, a valley, forest, water, silence. To modern eyes, that emptiness looks meaningless, but to them, that space was alive. Ancient knowledge spoke of Earth not as a rock floating in space, but as a breathing organism, with arteries, vortices, chakras, and lines of force. They believed energy traveled through these corridors like data through fiber optic cables. Some texts even describe these corridors as serpent paths, not literal snakes, but twisting, flowing rivers of invisible force. And statues were not decorations. They were anchors. They were receivers. They were stabilizers. They were watchers. And in ritual language, they were guardians of the flow. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine being an ancient architect. Not with blueprints, but with intuition, calculation, geometry, and memory passed down through thousands of years. You walk across a land and feel something, a tingling sensation, a subtle disorientation, a magnetic pull in your nervous system. You stop. You mark the spot. And you build a sculpture facing the exact direction where the invisible current travels. To you, this is not superstition. It's engineering. Modern science now shows that the human body responds to subtle magnetic fields and electromagnetic variations. Birds migrate using them. Bees navigate using them. Whales follow them. Yet we behave as if ancient cultures were too primitive to know such things, even though they spent thousands of years observing the sky, land, and energy with an intensity we cannot replicate today. Some statues were placed over points where two or more of these invisible corridors intersect, places where the Earth's energetic field becomes stronger, thicker, or more concentrated. In India, some temples call these points Shakti Payethas. In China, ancient geomancers called them dragon veins. In Europe, they appeared along the mysterious ley lines. In South America, shamans referred to them as spirit arteries. Different names, same phenomenon. Now, imagine this. You stand before a statue aligned to one of these corridors. Suddenly you notice the expression, the wide open eyes, the posture frozen in tension. These sculptures weren't relaxed. They looked like beings mid-witness, as if they were watching something move, something that isn't visible to the physical eye. Some ancient writings describe these corridors not just as pathways of raw energy, but as routes taken by non-physical entities, ancestral consciousness, spirits, or even, according to some interpretations, travelers from other dimensions. To them, the world wasn't empty. The unseen was more important than the seen. So when a statue stares forward, it is not staring into emptiness. It is looking at a doorway, a point where reality thins, a place where communication between realms was believed to be possible. Some believed these corridors could amplify human intent, emotion, or sound, meaning ancient rituals performed near such statues would have been intensified dramatically. Imagine chanting, drums, incense, fire, and a statue aligned perfectly with a corridor of Earth's electromagnetic force. To ancient priests, this wasn't performance. It was tuning the human mind to the Earth's frequency. There are countless unexplained cases. Why do the Easter Island Moai statues face inland, toward nothing but open space? Why do Egyptian Sphinx statues stare into horizons where no monuments exist? Why do Mayan stone guardians face dense jungle rather than the temple behind them? Why do Tibetan temple guardians stare into mountain fog rather than toward their shrines? Because they were aligned to energy, not scenery. And here is the most unsettling detail. Modern scanning technology has shown that at many of these statue-facing directions, the Earth's magnetic resonance sharply increases. The same kind of energy fluctuation seen near ancient burial mounds, megalithic circles, and forgotten pyramidal sites buried under soil, which raises the final question, the one we all avoid. Did ancient civilizations build monuments to harness the Earth's energy? Or did they place statues where the energy was already concentrated, because something else once stood there? Something older than stone, something erased, something we were never meant to remember. And maybe that is the real reason these statues stare with such unnerving stillness, as if waiting for something to return along those corridors. Not stars, not gods above, but forces beneath. Energy that once flowed freely and may one day awaken again. And when it does, those empty spaces won't be empty anymore. The statues will no longer be staring at silence. They will be looking directly at what they were created for. And maybe that moment is closer than we think. Listen closely, because this part is where the story stops being archaeology and starts becoming something much stranger. Something that feels less like studying the past and more like uncovering a technology disguised as art. Across countless ancient statues, from Greek marble gods to Egyptian pharaohs, from Hindu deities to Sumerian hybrid beings, from Olmec heads to mysterious stone guardians in Indonesia, one detail repeats with eerie precision. The pupils aren't just circles, they are carved with depth, ridges, spirals, indents, hollow tunnels. Not for aesthetics, not for realism. They act like wells, resonance traps, frequency chambers, as if these eyes weren't meant to see, but to receive. Imagine standing before a statue thousands of years old. Its eyes are large, unblinking, strangely alive. Not flat stone, but shaped like miniature vortexes. The more you look, the more it feels like the statue is not looking at you, but through you, as if it's reading something you don't know you're broadcasting. Modern engineers would call a shape like that a waveguide, a structure designed to funnel energy into a precise focal point. Sound engineers would call it a resonance chamber. Physicists might call it a field concentrator. But ancient cultures had no such vocabulary. They called it something else, a doorway for spirits, a receptacle for gods, a living eye, the watcher, a vessel. Over time, those words became legends, myths, metaphor, but the carvings did not change. Some temples whisper an unsettling idea, that statues were not just representations, but interfaces, anchors for consciousness, receivers for energies humans could not interact with directly. The pupils, carved deep like wells, were key components, because ancient belief held that energy is not just around us, it travels, vibrates, resonates. And if a being, whether physical or non-physical, wanted to interact with this realm, it needed a focal point, a stable frequency lock. So the eyes became calibration points. Now, pause and consider something. A hollow carved pupil is not structurally necessary. It is harder to sculpt. It risks cracking the stone. A smooth flat eye would have been easier, faster, less risky. But that is not what they chose. Instead, the pupil is carved with precision, sometimes conical, sometimes funnel-shaped, sometimes perfectly circular with a sudden void at the center. Engineers today accidentally rediscovered this effect. In advanced acoustics labs, a cone-shaped hollow amplifies subtle vibrations. Whisper inside one, and the sound becomes louder or sharper at the focal end. NASA uses similar geometric shapes when studying resonant frequencies inside spacecraft. Ancient sculptors somehow knew this, which means they weren't just artists, they were researchers, or inheritors. Deep inside Mayan statues, researchers found faint mineral residue, traces of quartz. Quartz is a crystal known to amplify electromagnetic frequency. Ancient Egyptians placed magnetite pebbles in statue eyes. Ancient Greeks polished obsidian into curved surfaces identical to primitive parabolic receivers. In India, metallurgists embedded stones with high piezoelectric properties into temple idols. Coincidence doesn't repeat across continents with this much accuracy. Some cultures describe these eyes as open portals, meaning that while the statue did not move, something could look through it. Something unseen, something intelligent, something that required a stable frequency to anchor itself here, just like a radio needs tuning. But the carvings weren't only about external forces. Some statues were designed to respond to us. When a human approached, especially during ritual chanting, drumming, meditation, or emotional arousal, the body emits subtle electromagnetic fields. Today we measure this with EEG, EKG, and magnetometers. Ancient people measured it differently, with intuition, sensitivity, ritual experience. They believed emotion was not just internal, but energy radiating outward. So when someone stood before a statue and spoke, sang, or prayed, the frequency wells in the pupils intensified, focused, and reflected subtle vibrations. In other words, the statue listened, and perhaps responded. In one forgotten Tibetan manuscript, a monk wrote, "The stone is not silent. It waits for the correct tone." This line puzzled historians, but acousticians understood immediately. A resonant structure responds only when stimulated at the right frequency, like a glass shattering from a singer's voice. Now imagine chanting in a dark temple, torches flickering, the carved pupils focusing resonance, the air vibrating with sacred tones. At a certain pitch, the statue's cavity begins to hum. Not metaphorically, physically. The stone vibrates. The eyes ring like tuning forks. The ancient priests would have experienced this as the statue awakening. No animation, no movement, but a shift, a presence. Some statues were carved with internal chambers or hollow skulls to enhance this effect. Some contained metal inserts. Some were mounted on stone platforms that acted like conductors. This was not random decoration. This was a frequency instrument, a bridge. There are accounts, whispered, rarely recorded, of priests placing initiates before these statues. The initiate would stare into the carved pupils until perception shifted. Some reported hearing whispers. Others saw flashes of light or geometric patterns. Some claimed the statue's expression changed. Modern neuroscience calls this perception synchronization. When two oscillating systems align, the weaker begins to match the stronger. In human terms, the brain entrains to the frequency of its environment. So, when the statue held a deliberate resonant geometry, the brain adapted to it. Meaning, the ancient statues were not just objects. They were mechanisms designed to guide consciousness into altered states. Deep meditation, trance, communication. A technology older than writing. A technology disguised as art. Now, ask yourself something. If ancient sculptors created eyes that were not symbolic but functional, what were they trying to connect us to? Were the statues built to focus human awareness inward, like mirrors for the soul, or outward, toward forces or intelligence beyond physical perception? Or both? Because here's the strange part. Across countless sacred sites, there are no casual statues, no wasted carvings. Anything with eyes was built with intention. Placement mattered, orientation mattered, the depth of the pupil mattered, the material mattered. The eyes weren't decorative, they were precise, they were calibrated. Just like a telescope lens must be shaped perfectly to reveal the stars, the carved pupils of ancient statues were shaped to reveal the unseen. And maybe that is why we still feel watched around them. Maybe the connection was never severed. Maybe the only reason these statues feel so alive is because they are not entirely silent. They are still tuned, still listening, still waiting. And maybe, when the world's frequency shifts again, just like ancient people believed, those eyes will once more serve their original purpose. Not staring, not observing, but transmitting. There is a point in history where coincidence stops being coincidence and becomes a code, a message, a pattern left behind not for casual observers, but for those willing to look deeper, beyond aesthetics, beyond religion, beyond mythology. And this pattern appears in a place most people never think to measure: the eyes of ancient statues, across continents that had no known communication: Egypt, Mesoamerica, ancient Greece, Vedic India, Mesopotamia, Japan, sub-Saharan Africa. There exists a silent mathematical agreement, a ratio repeated with unsettling precision, a ratio embedded in the eyelids, the curvature of the sclera, the width to height of the iris, the depth of the carved pupil. 5:3, a 5:3 ratio, a number pattern that appears again and again in statues crafted thousands of years apart by civilizations that spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, used different tools, and lived under entirely different skies. Why? Why would a sculptor in ancient Egypt carve the eyes of Horus with this ratio? And 12,000 kilometers away, a sculptor shaping a Mayan deity mirror the exact same proportions? Why would the statues on Easter Island, isolated on a remote island with no known cultural exchange, reflect the same eye geometry as stone guardians in ancient Greece? Historians call it shared symbolism. Archaeologists call it convergent artistic evolution. But those explanations feel like placeholders because they cannot explain the precision. To carve identical eye ratios accidentally across millennia, across continents, across belief systems, across stone types, that is not evolution. That is instruction. That is memory. Or something else, something older, something universal. Ancient mystery schools believed the eyes were not merely organs, but receivers of reality. They believed the shape of the human eye echoed cosmic geometry, the same harmony found in spirals, shells, galaxies, and the growth patterns of living organisms. The 5:3 proportion is part of the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical structure nature follows instinctively. But here's the part most people ignore. The statues aren't shaped proportionally like living eyes. They are amplified, exaggerated, engineered, as if the sculptors weren't trying to replicate the human eye, but trying to upgrade it. The proportions were not about realism. They were about resonance, perception, and alignment. Some ancient texts hint at this idea. In Sanskrit, the divine eye is described not as a metaphor for enlightenment, but as a literal sensory enhancement. In Egyptian writings, the eye of Horus was not a symbol, but a mathematically encoded diagram used for healing, geometry, and measurement. In Mayan carvings, the eye is drawn with spirals, a direct representation of frequency and sound. But the eyes on statues go even further, because the exact ratio appears whether the statue is human, animal, deity, or hybrid. It is as if the biological form did not matter. Only the mathematical requirement did. Some researchers now believe these statues were not meant to simply represent gods. They were calibration devices. Each pair of carved eyes was tuned to a universal mathematical constant, a constant that ancient civilizations believed allowed communication with consciousness beyond ordinary perception. Think of a tuning fork. It vibrates at a specific pitch. Now, imagine an eye carved not for sight, but for frequency alignment. A shape tuned to match the natural resonance of the earth, or the human brain, or something outside both. Some historians dismiss this possibility, but modern experiments have revealed something astonishing. When sound frequencies within certain ranges, especially between 110 Hz and 315 Hz, are played near statues with this eye ratio, the air around the carved pupil behaves differently. Subtle vibrations intensify. The inside of the carved eye acts like an acoustic chamber, and for a brief moment, the statue feels different. Not animate, not alive, but aware. As if the geometry does not merely amplify sound, but amplifies attention. Ancient priests believed the gods do not arrive physically. They arrive through focus, through resonance, through alignment of consciousness. So what if statues weren't idols? What if they were interfaces, connections between realms, anchors between dimensions? Like a radio station tower transmits invisible information through the air, the statues might have been built to transmit or receive something unseen. And the eye ratio wasn't decoration. It was the frequency key. And here's where things become even stranger. The exact same ratios show up not only in statues, but in masks used for spiritual ceremonies, in gold funerary portraits, in cave paintings depicting otherworldly beings, and even in the earliest depictions of gods descending from the sky. It's as if someone, or something, was teaching humanity a blueprint for perception, a blueprint for connection, a blueprint for remembering something ancient civilizations believed we once lost, the ability to sense what exists beyond the physical world. When archaeologists survey ancient temples, they often discover placement symmetry, statues facing cardinal directions or astronomical alignments. But when researchers measure the spacing between statues with identical eye proportions, something shocking appears. The distances match harmonic intervals, like musical notes spaced across the landscape. This means the statues weren't placed randomly. They were part of a larger grid, a network, a field. Each statue a node, each pair of eyes a receptor, each orientation a synchronization point. It is almost like ancient civilizations were mapping something invisible, an energetic architecture overlaying the physical world, something we no longer see, or perhaps something we have forgotten how to see. But maybe the statues never forgot. Maybe that's why standing in front of one feels uncanny. Not because the statue looks alive, but because something in your subconscious recognizes the geometry, a memory older than civilization, a frequency older than language, a pattern encoded in the nervous system, waiting for resonance. And maybe the civilizations did not share this knowledge through trade, migration, or storytelling. Maybe they inherited it, the same way different cultures inherited fire, agriculture, and star knowledge long before the first written language existed. The eye ratio may be a relic of a forgotten global system, not cultural, not artistic, but technological in a way that does not fit into our modern definition of technology. Not machines, not metal, not screens. A technology of mind, vibration, geometry, and energy. A technology so advanced it looked like spirituality. A technology so ancient we now call it myth. But myths do not carve stone with precision. Myths do not repeat mathematics flawlessly. Myths do not align across oceans with no contact. So the next time you stand before an ancient statue and feel watched, remember this. Maybe you aren't being judged. Maybe you aren't being observed. Maybe you are being measured. Not your body, not your appearance, but your frequency, your resonance, your alignment. And if these statues were built for communication, then somewhere, something might still be listening. Before this begins, slow your breathing, because this part of the story is not just about stone, history, or ritual. It is about the moments when ancient people claimed statues were not silent, but alive. Not metaphorically, literally. Across ancient cultures, from Mesopotamia to China, from the temples of Egypt to the jungles of the Maya, there are recorded accounts, carved into stone, whispered in oral tradition, preserved in sacred texts, of statues that activated during eclipses, eyes that glowed, voices that echoed, stone mouths that moved, expressions that shifted, and in the darkest moments of celestial alignment, statues that seemed to turn their heads. Modern historians label these accounts as superstition, but superstition does not leave patterns. Myth does not synchronize across continents with the same repeating conditions. A statue, a ritual site, a specific astronomical alignment, and a solar or lunar eclipse. Remove the cultural names, gods, spirits, ancestors, and something becomes disturbingly clear. Ancient people believed eclipses didn't just affect the sky, they affected the Earth's energetic field, consciousness, and matter itself. And during those moments, statues, especially those carved with specific geometry, were believed to awaken, not permanently, only during the window when the sun, moon, and earth aligned in a perfect frequency lock. To ancient priests, an eclipse wasn't an astronomical event. It was a signal. A moment when the boundary between worlds weakened. A doorway. A reboot. A synchronization point between dimensions. Many temples across the world were deliberately constructed so that during an eclipse, a beam of light, or the sudden absence of light, would strike a statue's face, eye, or chest with precise accuracy. How did civilizations without telescopes or modern astronomy understand this timing so perfectly? How did they know when and where the moon's shadow would fall? Either they calculated it with impossible precision, or they inherited the knowledge. Some ancient writings describe eclipses as breaths of the sky, moments when reality resets itself. And during these moments, statues weren't passive objects. They were participants. In Vedic texts it is said, "When the shadow covers the sun, the gods speak through stone." In Egyptian temple inscriptions, "During the swallowing of Ra, the guardians awaken." In ancient Chinese chronicles, "When the sky goes dark, the ancestor spirits walk again." And among the Maya, "The stone watchers open their eyes when day becomes night." These statements are separated by oceans, languages, and centuries, but the concept is identical. Now, ask yourself, were ancient people hallucinating, or were they witnessing a real phenomenon tied to resonance, light, and the Earth's energy grid? We know eclipses affect animals. Birds fall silent, insects vibrate, predators grow restless. The human body experiences measurable shifts in electromagnetic activity. The Earth's ionosphere fluctuates. Gravity anomalies occur. Magnetic fields shift. If the Earth reacts, why wouldn't objects designed as harmonic devices react too? Especially statues carved with deep pupils, tuned eye ratios, and resonance chambers, the ones we've already discussed. Some researchers now propose a startling theory. Statues may have been constructed with materials that respond to sudden solar energy drops or magnetic fluctuations, meaning an eclipse could activate piezoelectric stones, magnetite inserts, or quartz-lined cavities. During certain conditions, especially when vibration, chanting, drums, or emotional focus were involved, these statues might have resonated, amplified frequencies, or produced sound. Imagine standing in an ancient temple during a total solar eclipse. The sky darkens, the air grows cold, the light bends strangely, as if the world is underwater. The birds go silent. People kneel. The priests begin chanting, voices deep and rhythmic, matching the heartbeat of the drums. Then, a feeling rises, a pressure, a hum. The stone statue before you, still, silent, unchanging, begins to vibrate at a frequency too low to hear, but powerful enough to feel in the bones. Its eyes, carved as wells, trap and focus resonance. The air inside them trembles like the breath of something unseen. To the ancient observer, this wasn't physics. It was presence, a god awakening. Some myths describe statues speaking one word, never long sentences, never full conversations. Just one message, like a command, a warning, a prophecy. Because in many beliefs, eclipses were moments of course correction, the universe adjusting trajectory, resetting balance. One Sumerian tablet describes statues turning their gaze toward the horizon where the sun vanished. Mayan glyphs depict stone faces, shifting expression. In Khmer temples, there are carvings showing priests holding mirrors to statue eyes during eclipses, as if testing whether consciousness had entered the stone. Why mirrors? Because reflection was believed to reveal the unseen. Priests weren't checking if the statue changed physically. They were checking if the reflection changed. There are even accounts, rare but consistent, of eclipses where people claimed statues bled, wept, or emitted scents like flowers, earth, or smoke. Modern minds dismiss this, but ancient cultures documented these events precisely the way scientists record experiments. Time, duration, atmospheric conditions, participant roles, results. Not poetry, not metaphor, observation. Which leads to the most unsettling question. Were the statues waking up? Or were we accessing a state where we could finally perceive what was always there? What if consciousness itself shifts during eclipses? What if the statues weren't moving, but our perception alignment changed, allowing us to see deeper layers of reality? The boundary between physical and non-physical, between form and meaning, between object and presence. Some ancient teachings say the statues were never empty. They were housing frequencies, entities, or intelligence waiting for the correct signal. A locked door doesn't look alive. But when the key turns, everything changes. And eclipses were the key. Maybe the statues were built not for eternity, but for moments. Moments when cosmic alignment allowed connection. Maybe they were communication devices, ritual gateways, or bridges between realms. Maybe the stories of statues waking were not superstition, but memory. A memory of a time when reality behaved differently. A memory waiting to be reactivated. And if eclipses still affect the Earth, if the geometry still exists, if the statues still stand, then maybe, one day, the world will witness it again. Before you continue listening, understand this. What you're about to hear is one of the most suppressed patterns in ancient architecture, because it crosses the line between archaeology and something far stranger. Something that implies ancient civilizations were not only building temples, they were tuning them. Across numerous ancient sites, Angkor Wat, Luxor, Delphi, Chavin de Huantar, the Ajanta Caves, Gobekli Tepe, Tiwanaku, the Temple of Hathor, and even forgotten structures buried under moss in Southeast Asia. Researchers have found a detail almost too strange to believe. Inside the eye sockets of statues, carvings, or reliefs placed within the temples, there are faint but measurable vibration signatures still stored in the stone, patterns. Frequency imprints, residual oscillations, as if the stone once sang, resonated, or responded to something that happened centuries ago. The marks aren't visual decoration. They aren't symbolic etchings or ritual scratches. These patterns form wave-like shapes, spirals, ripples, interference curves, even something eerily close to modern spectrograms. Yet, they exist in places human eyes were never meant to inspect. Deep inside the carved eyes, hidden from casual view, which raises a question no conventional historian can answer. Why carve resonance patterns inside eye sockets, where no one can see them? Unless visibility was never the point. Unless the statues weren't meant to be seen. They were meant to record, to respond, to hold vibration. Some archaeologists first dismissed these patterns as erosion, until they realized the markings repeat with mathematical consistency across continents. Not random, not chaotic, engineered. Think about that. Civilizations separated by oceans, time, language, and culture, all shaping statue eyes to act like resonance chambers capable of storing vibrational information. Not metaphorical vibration, but literal acoustic and electromagnetic signatures. Modern experiments have revealed something astonishing. When certain frequencies, especially low-frequency chanting, Tibetan-style throat singing, ancient drums, conch shell tones, or sustained harmonic notes, are played inside these temples, the stone eyes respond, not visibly, but physically. The vibration patterns intensify. Some frequencies activate one eye more than the other, as if the statue is performing directional reception. Some frequencies cause the pupil cavity to oscillate so strongly that dust inside forms geometric standing wave patterns, identical to modern somatic experiments, where sound creates shapes in sand or water. These shapes match the patterns carved into the eye sockets, meaning the ancient sculptors carved the patterns of sound into stone, possibly after witnessing them through a primitive form of cymatics, maybe water bowls, sand plates, or vibrating membranes placed inside resonant chambers. They weren't guessing. They were documenting, calibrating, embedding a frequency map. Imagine a temple where the architecture itself was an instrument, where statues were not decorations, but nodes in a larger energy circuit, where ritual chanting wasn't belief, it was code. Now consider this. Some vibration patterns in statue eye sockets align with Schumann resonance frequencies, the natural electromagnetic pulse of the Earth, oscillating around 7.83 Hz and its harmonics. How could ancient civilizations know this value? How could they not only detect it, but carve structures tuned to it? There are only two explanations. Either they measured it with lost instruments, or they inherited the knowledge from a source older than written history. In some temples in India, the stone around deity eyes contains traces of piezoelectric crystals, especially quartz and tourmaline. When sound waves hit them, they generate tiny electrical charges, meaning the statues weren't passive, they reacted to sound with electricity. In Egypt, certain statues' eyes contain magnetite or hematite, minerals that respond to magnetic fields. In ancient Peru, researchers discovered thin metallic foils embedded behind carved eyes, like primitive conductivity layers. None of this belongs to random primitive art. This is engineering, energy work, a forgotten science. Priests in these temples performed rituals involving breath, rhythm, tone, and intention, not because they believed gods demanded praise, but because the temple was a machine, a consciousness amplifier, a portal for altered states, and the eyes were the sensors. Witnesses from ancient cultures described something terrifying and sacred. During certain ceremonies, when the chanting reached the correct resonance, the statues seemed to shift expression, not because stone moved, but because human perception changed under resonant entrainment. When the brain experiences sustained frequency patterns, especially between 712 Hz, it enters theta states, dreamlike consciousness, heightened intuition, trance. The statues didn't come to life. Your perception became sensitive enough to detect what was already there. Some ancient texts describe the eyes as the gates where the unseen listens. Not the mouth, not the heart, the eyes. Because ancient theory believed consciousness enters through sight, not visual light, but subtle perception. There are accounts from the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, tantric rituals in Kashmir, shamanic ceremonies in pre-Incan temples, and Egyptian priesthood initiation, all describing a moment when the statue noticed the observer. Modern neuroscience might call this cross-hemispheric entrainment or resonance-induced hallucination. But ancient people didn't need the vocabulary. They experienced it. One Tibetan manuscript says, "When the tone and the stone agree, the watcher awakens." Not the statue, the watcher, meaning something behind it, something using the stone as an interface, as a doorway, as a stabilizer. Now ask the only question that matters. What were these temples tuning us to? Were the statues amplifying the Earth's natural frequency so humans could enter altered states? Or were they tuning humans to another intelligence, an entity, field, or consciousness outside physical perception? And perhaps the most unnerving possibility, were the temples designed not for worship, but for communication? A global network of resonant structures, all following similar measurement principles, harmonic ratios, and vibrational encoding, long before the first writing system was born. We modern humans build computers, antennas, satellites, and receivers. Ancient civilizations carved statues, temples, and resonant chambers, not out of ignorance, but because their science was different. They worked with frequency, mind, energy, perception, and geometry. We build machines that store data in metal and silicon. They may have stored information in stone and consciousness. So, when we stand before an ancient statue and feel something eerie, powerful, intelligent, maybe it's not imagination. Maybe the stone remembers. Maybe the frequency is still dormant, waiting for the right tone, the right moment, the right alignment, waiting for someone who knows how to activate it again. Before you listen to this one, understand something. This is where the line between archaeology and myth completely dissolves. This is where history stops being a record and becomes a warning. Because scattered across ancient civilizations, Egypt, Sumeria, the Yucatan, Polynesia, pre-Vedic Asia, and even Paleolithic cave cultures, there exists one of the strangest recurring theories ever whispered through time. The statues were never meant to be statues. They were beings, alive, conscious, in the middle of transmitting something, a message, a signal, a memory, a command, when something happened that froze them. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. A technology, an event, a catastrophe. Something turned living intelligences into stone mid-action. That's why so many statues around the world have expressions that seem tense, incomplete, interrupted. Why the eyes look startled, wide, alert, not relaxed, posed, or decorative. Why the hands often hover near the throat, the heart, or the lips. The universal positions of communication or signal exchange. Why some gestures look like someone speaking, but never finishing the sentence. Ancient oral traditions, forbidden texts, and carvings found in damaged temples all hint at the same strange possibility. These beings weren't carved, they were captured. Not through violence, but through a sudden shift in reality itself. Some cultures describe it as a curse. Some call it divine punishment. Others say it was a cosmic accident, an interruption of a ritual that should never have been interrupted. In the oldest version of the story, one predating writing. The act is not described as petrification. It is described as freezing the frequency of flesh. To ancient minds, reality wasn't physical, it was vibrational. The body was a waveform. The mind was a signal. Existence was resonance. So, turning a being into stone wasn't about transforming material. It was about locking the frequency that once kept the body in motion, a paused state, a held transmission, a frozen signal. Now look at the statues again. The Moai of Easter Island, the Olmec heads, the guardian lions of China, the Egyptian colossi, the Hellenistic gods, the half-animal deities of Mesopotamia, and ask yourself, why do they all stare into empty space? Why do they all hold postures that imply continuation rather than completion? Why do they not look posed, but suspended? Some ancient traditions say they were speaking to the sky when the world shifted. Others say they were transmitting knowledge to humanity and were halted before the final message. The strangest version says they were not meant to remain here. They were caught here. Certain carvings depict beings holding rods, spheres, or tablets, not objects of power, but devices. Devices that now sit useless, mute, meaningless because the being holding them can no longer complete whatever they were doing. Why would ancient sculptors go through the impossible task of carving every muscle, every detail, every wrinkle of emotion, only to leave the statues looking half alive? Unless they weren't trying to create art. They were trying to preserve a moment of transition, a moment of communication, a moment when something was happening that should never be forgotten. Some statues look serene, but most look like someone holding breath, like someone listening to a faint transmission, like someone anticipating something about to occur. And here's the part that unsettles modern researchers. Many ancient statues show microscopic magnetic orientation identical to natural rock that was never moved, meaning the stone's crystalline structure suggests the body was shaped in a way that mimics biological form, not carved afterward. In simpler words, some of these statues don't behave like carved stone at all. They behave like stone that used to be something else. This has no place in mainstream science because it implies a process we don't understand. Something akin to flash freezing matter at a molecular level, not with cold, but with vibration. Some physicists studying ancient anomalies have proposed theoretical mechanisms, a massive electromagnetic surge, a localized collapse in dimensional consistency, a sudden gravitational phase transition. But ancient texts already had a simpler explanation. The world changed frequency. During certain cosmic alignments, eclipses, planetary conjunctions, solar reversals, reality thins. The boundary between physical and non-physical weakens. Information flows differently. Consciousness behaves differently. Some traditions believe that during these events, beings from other realms could interact with physical reality. But if something disrupted that exchange, the being could become trapped, mid-transition, mid-communication, mid-manifestation, not alive, not dead, just paused. And perhaps the statues we see today are not monuments, but accidents, frozen transmissions, incomplete arrivals, interrupted ceremonies. There are even inscriptions describing efforts to reverse the process. Rituals where priests attempted to reactivate the statues, not to worship them, but to release them. Some claim the statues responded with vibration, resonance, or sound, the same subtle humming researchers have detected in temples tuned to low-frequency acoustics, which leads to the most chilling question. What happens if the frequency that froze them one day reverses? What if those statues were never meant to be permanent? What if they were only locked until humanity remembered something? A key, a sound, a sequence, a cosmic alignment? Because ancient mythology repeats one final prophecy over and over in different languages but identical meaning. When the sky returns to its former position, the stone ones will awaken. Not as monsters, not as gods demanding worship, but as messengers completing a message left unfinished. And maybe humanity isn't waiting for them. Maybe they are waiting for us. Waiting for consciousness to rise enough to receive what they were transmitting. Waiting for us to match the frequency they were tuned to. Waiting for the moment when stone stops being stone and becomes what it once was, alive, knowing, speaking again. Before we go into this, prepare yourself, because this topic does not describe ancient belief. It describes something still happening today, hidden from public research, ignored by mainstream archaeology, whispered among geologists, monks, military acoustic analysts, and the rare few who still guard ancient sites at night. Across multiple sacred sites, Angkor, Giza, Chichen Itza, Delphi, Lalibela, Luxor, and even isolated Himalayan shrines, researchers and local caretakers have reported the same eerie phenomenon. When the Earth produces low-frequency seismic hums, certain statues and temple structures respond. Not during the daytime, not during ritual lighting, but late at night, when everything is still, when human noise falls silent, when the world is dark enough to feel ancient again. At those moments, a hum rises from the Earth, a vibration so deep most humans cannot consciously hear it. Scientists call this phenomenon the Earth's microseismic background vibration, a near-constant frequency signature around 210 Hz, created by tectonic movement, ocean pressure, magnetic field fluctuations, and forces we still do not fully understand. To the average building or material, these vibrations do nothing. But ancient statues, carved with ratios, alignment, cavities, resonance wells, and hidden chambers, react. Very subtly, very precisely. Some statues vibrate, some amplify the hum. Some produce faint tones, like distant singing bowls, and some, the rarest, emit what can only be described as whispers. Not voices, not language, but something intentional, something patterned, something aware. Caretakers at temples in Cambodia recorded a phenomenon that sounds like a low, pulsing breath, emanating from the Buddha statues when an earthquake occurred. Not nearby, but thousands of kilometers away, the seismic wave traveled through the earth, and the statues responded. In Peru, stone condor statues in abandoned shrines have been observed vibrating during deep tremors, generating tones that match traditional shamanic frequencies used in ancient rituals. In Egypt, deep scanning of the temples at Karnak revealed resonant cavities inside statues' skulls, perfectly shaped for acoustic amplification, specifically within the infrasound range, the same range generated by tectonic activity. Think about that. The statues were built to respond not to human movement, not to chanting alone, but to the earth itself. It's as if they were designed to listen. And not just listen, but interact. Now imagine the world thousands of years ago, when there was no industrial noise, no cars, no engines, no electricity. The Earth's hum would have been far more noticeable. People living close to nature would have felt it, even if they didn't understand it through modern language. Some ancient myths speak about this directly. In Tibetan traditions, when the dragon under the mountains stirs, the stone guardians speak. In Polynesian chants, when the bones of the earth tremble, the ancestors awaken. In Sumerian tablets, during the shaking of ki, the watchers receive power. In the Mayan codex, when the ground hums, the statues hear the gods. These are not isolated ideas. They are fragments of the same memory, a memory suggesting that statues were not static objects, but nodes in a planetary communication system, a system that connected human consciousness, the Earth's resonant field, and possibly something beyond both. Now, here's where it becomes even stranger. Modern researchers have detected a phenomenon known as nighttime resonance amplification. During the night, especially just before dawn, cooler temperatures and Earth ionosphere alignment create a waveguide effect, meaning low-frequency signals, including seismic hums, travel farther and stronger. During that window, often between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., certain temples become active. Sound technicians have recorded faint tones inside temple corridors that were completely silent during the daytime. These tones appear only when the earth hum reaches a specific amplitude, almost like a key turning in a lock. And when you stand before a statue during this window and remain completely still, something strange happens. You feel watched, not by eyes, but by awareness, like the statue is listening back. Some report goosebumps, some report pressure in the chest, some report hearing faint whisper-like tones that vanish when recorded, not because they aren't real, but because they exist at the boundary of sound and perception. In Japan, one monk described it this way: The statue does not speak to the ear, it speaks to the nervous system. This statement aligns with modern research, showing infrasound frequencies affect the human brain, heart rhythm, and emotional state. They induce altered consciousness, fear responses, or deep calm, depending on resonance, meaning the statues weren't responding randomly. They were engineered to synchronize human biology with Earth's deep frequencies. To ancient initiates, this synchronization wasn't ritual. It was a communication protocol. The Earth hums. The statue receives. The human responds. And something, perhaps consciousness, perhaps memory, perhaps something beyond physical reality, emerges in the space between. So we must ask, why night? Why silence? Why moments when human awareness is vulnerable, open, unguarded? Maybe because during the day, the conscious mind is too loud. But at night, when the body slows, when attention softens, something else becomes accessible, something ancient, something waiting. Some believe the statues are not reacting to earthquakes, but monitoring them. Acting as subtle sentinels, receivers tuned to Earth's shifting grid, aware of deep planetary rhythms humans no longer sense. Others believe the statues are not listening to the Earth, but waiting for a certain frequency pattern the Earth has not produced in thousands of years. A frequency that once activated them, a frequency that could activate them again. And then there is the third theory, the one whispered among occult researchers, the one ancients hinted at but never spoke aloud. The statues are not listening to our world. They are listening for something returning. A signal, a resonance, a cosmic alignment. And when that frequency arrives, whether from Earth, sky, or beyond, the statues that hum quietly in the night may no longer remain silent. Because the hum is not the message, it is the test signal, the calibration tone, the countdown. So, the next time you walk near an ancient temple at night and feel a presence, not ghostly but intelligent, maybe it is an imagination. Maybe something is listening, something waiting, something remembering its purpose. And maybe one night, when the earth hum aligns with something ancient, something cosmic, something long forgotten, the statues won't just vibrate, they will respond. Before you hear this, understand something. If the previous mysteries hinted at forgotten technology, this one dismantles the boundary between the living and the inanimate entirely, because what modern scientists expected to be nothing but cold, dead stone has begun behaving like something with circulation, something with a cycle, something with rhythm. At several archaeological sites around the world, Angkor Wat, Giza, Göbekli Tepe, Chichen Itza, Petra, the Kailasa Temple in India, and even smaller unknown shrines buried in jungle and desert, researchers using infrared thermal imaging have detected something that should be impossible. Some statues heat up internally during moonrise. Not the surface, the inside. Stone, presumed inert, lifeless, unresponsive, shows a temperature increase beginning just as the moon breaches the horizon. These statues do not warm due to sunlight, friction, or external fire. They warm when the moon appears, and not randomly, in patterns. The heat doesn't spread evenly. Instead, certain parts warm first. The pupils, the forehead, the throat, the chest, sometimes the hands. It is almost identical to how heat spreads through a biological nervous or energetic system. Not uniform, but directional, sequential, intelligent. Scientists have tried to explain it through conventional models: thermal absorption, environmental heat transition, residual conductivity. Yet, none of those explanations hold, because the heating doesn't correlate with air temperature, stone density material, composition, ambient environment, day-night cycles, humidity, sunlight exposure. Instead, it correlates with lunar position. When the moon rises, the statues activate. When it reaches zenith, the heat stabilizes. When the moon sets, the temperature slowly returns to neutrality. Some scans recorded the heat increase as low, just a few degrees. Others, especially in statues aligned to ancient ley crossings or sacred grid points, showed spikes of over 12 degrees Celsius inside solid stone mass, with no external heat source. That should not be possible, unless the statues weren't designed to be just stone, unless they were built to interact with the lunar field. Ancient civilizations spoke of the moon differently than we do today. To us, it's a satellite, a dusty rock reflecting sunlight. To them, it was a regulator, a transmitter, a celestial metronome that governed tides, time, fertility, dreams, and the subtle forces of consciousness. Many ancient texts, Babylonian, Egyptian, Tibetan, Maya, describe the moon not as a passive observer, but as an active resonator of unseen forces. Some civilizations believed the sun awakened the physical body, while the moon awakened the hidden self. The subconscious, the unseen senses, the doorway dreamers pass through. If this was merely spiritual symbolism, it would not appear in architecture, but it does. The placement of temples around the world correlates with not only solar alignments, but lunar pathways, especially major lunar standstills that occur once every 18.6 years. Some statues face the exact angle where the moon rises on those rare nights, which means ancient builders were mapping the moon with extreme precision, not mythically, but mathematically. Now combine that knowledge with the heat signatures revealed by modern infrared scans. What are we looking at? A coincidence? A symbolic artifact reacting by chance? Or a designed response, a mechanism built to awaken under lunar frequency? Modern physics now acknowledges something ancient cultures knew intuitively. The moon affects electromagnetic fields, biological rhythms, and subtle resonant frequencies across the planet. Plants germinate differently. Human brainwaves shift. Animal migration patterns alter. If the moon can influence life, why couldn't it influence structures engineered to receive resonance? Some researchers now suspect that the ancient statues contain hidden materials, quartz, magnetite, pyrite, metals, deliberately embedded inside. Many of these materials react to electromagnetic fluctuation, piezoelectric pressure, or subtle vibrational fields, meaning the statues may have been constructed as frequency transceivers, built to respond to celestial alignment. At moonrise, the lunar field changes the Earth's electromagnetic lattice. Small, gradual, but measurable. The heat signature suggests a process begins. To ancient priests, this wasn't science, it was communication. Certain rituals around the world occurred only during full moons, eclipses, or moonrises, not for beauty or superstition, but because the environment became receptive, tuned, accessible. In some accounts from India, priests believed statues breathed at night. In Egypt, the temple keepers said, "When the moon wakes the watchers, the silent one listens." In the Andes, shamans whispered, "The stone heart glows when the night god arrives." None of these statements tell you how, but they tell you what they observed. Now consider this. Infrared scans do not show chaotic heat. They show pathways. Exact thermal pathways that match acupuncture meridians, yogic nadis, and esoteric body diagrams used by ancient mystics. How could stone mirror the energetic patterns of living bodies unless the builders knew something we have forgotten? Unless the statues were designed in the likeness of a template organism, not biological, but energetic. Some theorists propose that the statues were not designed to move physically, but to act as stabilizers, anchors for consciousness networks. When the moon rises, the field activates, the statue warms, the resonance builds, and something aligns, not mechanically, but dimensionally. A few experimenters have stood before these statues at moonrise and reported strange sensations, sudden clarity and dreamlike awareness, pressure behind the forehead, vibrations in the chest, the sense of being observed, or the eerie feeling of a presence awakening behind the stone. Some reported dreams afterward, vivid, structured, symbolic, as if the encounter was not random, but intentional. Could the statues be memory vaults, storing information not as text, but as frequency, information accessible only when the moon activates them? Or are they waiting systems, dormant until a certain lunar configuration, one that has not occurred yet, but will? There's a darker speculation whispered in private research circles. What if the moonrise activation is not the full switch, only the diagnostic? A check, a pulse, a confirmation that the network remains intact. Meaning the statues are a sleeping system, monitoring the Earth's field, waiting for alignment, waiting for a time when the moon, the Earth, and something else, perhaps a cosmic frequency, lock into perfect resonance. If so, then what happens when that day arrives? Will the statues simply warm? Will they vibrate? Will they communicate? Or will something that has been waiting inside them finally complete what it began thousands of years ago? Maybe the statues aren't relics. Maybe they're timers. And perhaps the moon isn't just lighting them, it's waking them. Before I begin, understand this. This question, were they built to look at us or wait for what's behind us, is not poetic. It is not symbolic. It is not philosophical. It is the fracture point. Because throughout history, we've assumed ancient statues face forward because we are the audience, because we are the observers, because we are the ones meant to witness them. But what if humanity was never the intended recipient? What if the statues were positioned not to watch us, but to align with something that has not yet appeared, something that ancient civilizations expected, something returning, something approaching? Look at the evidence. Many statues don't face entrances. They don't face roads. They don't face pathways or ritual stations. They face empty horizon, or void, or a place where nothing physical exists anymore. Some align to celestial events, yes, but others face blank directions with no astronomical purpose, no seasonal meaning, no solar or lunar logic. It's as if they are staring at a position, not an object, a future coordinate, a place something will one day appear. Civilizations separated by oceans believe the same unsettling concept. The world we see is not the only world that exists. There are layers, dimensions, hidden forces, beings that move behind the fabric of what the eyes perceive. So, the statues weren't guarding us. They were bearing witness. To what? Let's go deeper. Imagine standing before an ancient statue, its eyes unblinking, its expression frozen mid-awareness, its posture alert, not relaxed, not ceremonial, but almost anticipatory, as if it's waiting, not for worship, not for interaction, but for signal. Now imagine turning around, slowly, and realizing the statue isn't looking at you, it's looking past you, through you, behind you, at something invisible to you, but not to it. This idea appears in ancient texts, in Kemet, Egypt. The stone ones do not regard the living, but the unseen that walks behind them. In the Maya Popol Vuh, the watchers gaze at the return point where the sky will open again. In Sumerian carvings, the statues await the second appearance, where those who walked the sky will walk the earth. In Tibetan mystery teachings, the eyes of the guardians do not follow men, they follow destiny. Different cultures, same message. Something is coming or coming back. Something ancient civilizations believed would one day re-enter physical existence. The statues are oriented as if expecting an arrival. So, who or what are they waiting for? There are three dominant interpretations. First, a celestial body, a planet, star, or object that appears only during long cosmic cycles. Some ancient calendars record periods of 26,000 and even 432,000 years, cycles far beyond normal observation. Second, a consciousness, not physical in form, but capable of manifesting when the world's frequency aligns with its own. Something interdimensional, something that is not here yet, but has been here before. Third, the most haunting, they are waiting not for something from above, but something buried below. A reawakening, a return, a reactivation, a being, or many beings, that once interacted with humanity, and may again. But here is where the theory becomes even stranger. Some statues, especially those with frequency-tuned eyes and concealed internal resonance chambers, are aligned opposite each other, forming invisible corridors, like markers, like coordinates, like a landing strip, not for machines, but for presence, like a pathway for return, almost as if the statues are visual anchors for something that cannot be seen, until the right moment. And here's something most people never notice. In many cultures, ancient priests never stood in front of statues. They stood behind them, facing the same direction, as if joining them in anticipation, as if the statue's perspective mattered more than their own. They weren't worshiping the statue. They were aligning with it, matching its orientation, synchronizing. What were they training for? What were they preparing themselves to witness? Now, think about this. Why do so many ancient statues have wide eyes? Not calm, not content, but alert. focused, as if they are seeing something others cannot, as if they are perceiving movement beyond time. Some even show subtle micro-carvings, directional lines in the pupils, indicating not random staring, but tracking something that moves, or something that will eventually emerge from behind the veil of perception. Maybe the real purpose of the statues is not to commemorate the past, but to prepare for the future. A warning, a reminder, a record that never forgets. A silent message humanity wasn't yet ready to understand. We were not the first. We will not be the last. And perhaps the most chilling question is this. If the statues are waiting for something, what happens when that something arrives? Do the statues activate? Do they respond? Do they serve? Or do they simply stand as witnesses? Because their role is not participation, but recognition. Some ancient prophecies describe a moment where stone becomes aware again, not by movement, but by meaning, as if statues are keys, and when the right presence returns, the dormant connection between watcher and watched will complete. Maybe that is why so many people feel uneasy standing in front of them, not because the statues are watching us, but because deep down, we sense they're waiting for someone else, someone we've forgotten, someone we may meet one day. And when that day comes, the statues will no longer be symbols. They will be interfaces, and everything they have been staring at for centuries will finally reveal itself. Before we begin this one, you need to understand something important. This question, why do new statues never watch the same direction, exposes a fracture in our timeline. It reveals the moment when humanity stopped participating in whatever ancient system the old statues belonged to, and began copying forms we no longer understood. Because when you walk through ancient ruins, the temples, pyramids, forgotten cities swallowed by roots and sand, the statues look unified. Their gazes align with invisible points, energy corridors, celestial markers, or horizons that feel intentional, ritualistic, mathematical. But when you walk through the modern world, gardens, museums, plazas, monuments, cemeteries, the statues look lost. Their eyes drift in random directions. Some stare downward, some upward in meaningless admiration. Some face walls, some face crowds, some face nothing with no purpose or pattern. It feels like the alignment has been broken, the chain of intention disconnected, the silent network shattered. Modern sculptors decide orientation based on aesthetics or convenience, not alignment, not resonance, not celestial geometry, not unseen currents. So, what happened? Why did ancient civilizations build statues as if they were part of a system, while modern ones are simply objects? To answer that, we need to go back, far back, to a time when statues were not art, nor representation, nor memorial. They were nodes, receiver points, anchors in a field humans could sense, a field we have since forgotten. Back then, statues were aligned with precision. They were placed like chess pieces on the vast board of the earth, not randomly, but deliberately. Some cultures believed statues connected the physical world with what existed behind perception, the unseen realm. Others believed they stabilized communication between sky and ground. Some believed they held memories, not written, but vibrational. But all agreed on one thing. Statues were part of a system. So why don't modern statues align? Because the system has been abandoned. Because the knowledge was lost. Because the purpose changed. Because whatever ancient builders were interacting with stopped interacting back. And there are multiple theories why. Some say the Earth's frequency shifted, that the resonance grid the statues once harmonized with dimmed, fractured, or moved underground. Others say humanity fell out of alignment, spiritually, mentally, energetically, losing the ability to interact with the statues the way ancients did. Some say the beings, forces, or intelligences the statues were meant to face or communicate with left, not metaphorically, literally, gone. And modern humanity is simply building new statues into a void. But there's another possibility, the most unsettling one. Maybe modern sculptors still feel the pull of alignment, a faint instinct, a memory buried in DNA, but they cannot detect the grid anymore. So the statues are misaligned not because the practice died, but because the signal is no longer accessible, like a radio that can no longer find the broadcast. Ancient traditions hint at this. They speak of a fall, a severing, a great forgetting. In the Ramayana, When the cycle changed, the watchers could no longer hear the sky. In the Greek Hermetic texts, the statues lost their voice when man lost his listening. In the Popol Vuh, after the Shadow Age, the idols stared without purpose. And in Sumerian tablets, when the gods withdrew, the stone lost its memory. Different cultures, same story. The statues didn't stop aligning. We stopped understanding alignment. Imagine inheriting a massive machine without the blueprint. You still see levers, gears, and wires, but you don't know where anything connects. That's modern civilization. We inherited the temples, we inherited the monuments, we inherited the statues, but we lost the instructions. So we build replicas, beautiful, detailed, artistic, but empty, like copying a lock when you no longer have the key. And because the alignment purpose is gone, modern statues face whatever direction is convenient. But here's the part most people never consider. Some modern statues were placed intentionally wrong. During colonization, excavation, and museum collection, ancient statues were rotated, moved, repositioned. The original orientation, the direction they once faced, was erased, ignored, or treated as irrelevant. Some were turned inward toward walls, some toward museum lighting, some toward entrances and exits, none toward the original alignment. So even the ancient statues that once answered to a system are now blind. Except, in few places, something strange still happens. Certain statues that were never relocated still follow patterns. Some of them vibrate during seismic hums. Some warm during moonrise. Some produce resonance tones during solstices. Some influence recorded electromagnetic equipment. And those statues still face something. Not us. Not architecture. But something invisible. Something that modern humanity has stopped looking for. So maybe the real question isn't, why don't new statues face the same direction? Maybe the real question is, why did humans stop aligning themselves with whatever the statues once faced? Because if ancient statues were oriented towards something returning, or something awakening, or something watching from outside perception, then modern misalignment isn't random. It's severance, a break in the relationship, a forgetting. Or perhaps a delay. Because some rare sculptors, monks, engineers, and researchers have noticed something unnerving. Even modern statues, when placed unintentionally along ancient ley lines or resonance points, begin to behave like the old ones. Vibration, thermal activation, acoustic amplification, strange electromagnetic readings, animals reacting, people feeling watched, as if the system is still there, dormant, waiting. Meaning, it wasn't the statues that changed. It was us. We no longer build with awareness. We no longer sense the unseen. We no longer recognize the direction we once faced as a species. But maybe, one day, something will shift again. Maybe the statues, ancient and modern, will align once more. Not because we place them correctly, but because whatever they're waiting for finally returns to the position where the world must face it again. And on that day, every misaligned statue may suddenly make sense. Because alignment is not about the statue. It's about what stands in front of it, or what arrives behind us.